Hey guys, welcome to the Modern Merchant Podcast. I'm your host, Jamie McCarthy. And today we have a super special guest on. We've got Blake Cadwell, the founder of Soundly. Hey, Blake.
Hi, good to be here.
Yeah, super happy to have you on. Blake, I know you and I kind of connected almost immediately when I first met you because we have a commonality. And it's pretty rare to really find somebody who can kind of understand sort of your plight, right? Really understand, growing up, what it's like with hearing loss. And so, I met you talking about, launching Soundly, and you were telling me, really your overall goal with Soundly is to, destigmatize hearing loss and really kind of help make it, make those hearing aids and tools that folks with hearing loss need, make those more accessible. So, I'm not going to give the entire pitch for you. I'll let you do that. But if you don't mind, just kind of letting everybody know, what is Soundly, and really, what's your backstory with that?
Yeah, so I can share more about Soundly and my story. So Soundly was just launched a month ago. You can find it at soundly.com. And the story behind the project really starts with my own personal experience that you alluded to, which is experience with hearing loss. And I have a hereditary hearing loss in both ears. And it's shared by my mom and my brother. They've both worn hearing aids for years. I, like many people, put it off for a really long time. So discovered my hearing loss when I was probably in junior high, around the time when my mom began treating her hearing loss. And from that time all the way until I turned 30, I just wasn't ready to wear hearing aids. Thought about it numerous times, kind of got close to it a few times. And, what I found every time I have sort of approached the topic was that the space is very, broken in a lot of ways. It's really difficult to get information. You have to go to lots of different websites to try to piece it all together. It's hard to actually buy product. You actually, in many cases you need to see a doctor, but even when you can find a product that you don't need to see a doctor for, it's difficult to find the right website to buy it on. And so all of that, I think inspired me to try to create a different front page experience, if you will, for the hearing health world. And that's what you find at Soundly now. And really it looks like an e-commerce experience. It's, you go there, you're shopping, you're comparing products, you see reviews, you see prices, all the things you would expect in a modern shopping experience. But it's pulling together this sort of complicated back end that is the hearing health world, so that consumers like myself and like my mom and brother and others can navigate treatment just much easier.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think, your story is a little bit unique in the sense that you're not just launching a business because you're, passionate about whatever it is, right? Surfing or, I don't know, whatever other niche or hobby people are really into. This is really something that's personally affected you. It's something that you've seen has personally affected your family. So I think, I know you mentioned, by the time you were 30, you were kind of ready to actually address it. But what was your actual light bulb moment, I guess, when it came to, okay, hey, I want to actually launch and create a business around this to help, hearing aids become more accessible, to help connect people to audiologists. I know you have the sound test on the site, which we can talk about too in a sec.
Yeah.
Was there really kind of a point where you decided, hey, this is, the path I want to move forward in?
Yeah, I would say the light bulb moment was almost immediate as I started to take it on myself, as I've spent the last 10 years of my career in advertising and brand marketing and creating consumer experiences with brands like Nike and Disney and Chipotle and American Express. And, most of that work was focused on how do you make delightful experiences and smooth and easy experiences for the consumers. That's what I've spent the last, decade focused on. And then, 2020. So the real backstory is in 2020, when everybody put masks on, anyone with hearing loss, maybe you can resonate with this, but anyone with hearing loss knows that reading lips is an important part of communication. Yeah. And so, as people put masks on, I lost that ability to read lips. And so my hearing loss went from a bit of an annoying part of my life or something I had to manage to something that was really affecting me in a meaningful way. And so I sat down in front of my computer and I started trying to research the products or the solutions that might help me solve my problem, and just immediately couldn't figure it out. And then, of course, because this is my background, I'm immediately thinking, this is unbelievable that I can't do this, that I can't compare products side by side, I can't look at them all in one place. I have 20 tabs open. How is this possible? And so my wheels were turning pretty much immediately. And, I started actually blogging about hearing loss and my experience in hearing loss at near that time. So around June of 2020, so a couple years ago. And then, those are kind of the foundational pieces that were laid that led me to Soundly and launching Soundly this year.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it kind of took off from there. So when you are, initially in those initial phases, I guess, really planning out really kind of your entire business model, I think one of the super important pieces that a lot of online retailers, just in my experience and talking to, what a lot of them overlook is kind of the power of like your vendor partnerships. Where are you going to source products if you're not creating your own products, right? How did you kind of navigate that? How did you navigate those relationships? How did you foster those, especially being pre-launch, pre-revenue? What were the conversations you were having with the suppliers?
Yeah. So, I think in the case of Soundly, the supplier relationships, the vendor relationships are really like the backbone of this whole thing. Because I think the consumer problem is that there are all the suppliers and the providers and the healthcare networks and the makers of the product are all scattered around
Right.
and at varying different levels of ability to connect to consumers. Some of them really far away from the consumer, and some of them a little closer to the consumer, but still not getting there. So really, as I started the business, that was the problem that I was identifying. So I think I came at it very directly as I need to get in touch with these people. I need to find a way to help them see the vision of what Soundly could be and what it means for their business. One kind of, I guess, secret weapon in all of this for me was the blog that I mentioned. So having started that blog in 2020, it was a fairly low stakes project for me. It was a side project. I didn't really know what it would become, but I began to write about this topic. And so I established that foundation. And a lot of the suppliers and the manufacturers and the brands became familiar with my work through the blog as it took off. And then by the time I was ready to launch Soundly and ask them to be a part of something more ambitious, they at least understood who I was. It wasn't like kind of a cold call.
Yeah. So you're really like developing your brand, even prior to, what Soundly is today. You were already kind of laying that foundation for those future conversations.
Yeah. I think the other thing for me is like taking time to really understand the landscape, the industry, and thinking empathetically about vendor partners and what their problems and challenges are. And one thing I realized pretty early on with Soundly is that the same things that I'm trying to solve, which is a confusing and broken consumer experience, are the same things that actually that keep these brands and partners up at night, or that they're thinking about as the world transitions to more informed consumers who want more information before they make big purchases. Many of these partners are trying to figure it out. They're having brainstorms on their side. So kind of getting into their mindset and realizing, okay, we're actually coming at the same problem. And that begins to make it really easy to get them at the table and wanting to work together.
Right. They're eager to have those conversations.
Yeah.
It sounds like. Yeah, that's amazing. And then I know that you and I have talked on this before too, but your industry in general, it's a little bit of a newer category, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know you had told me, and you'll be able to obviously give a lot more details on this than I could, but I know that you'd spoken before that there's been like recent legislation that's been passed to really kind of allow you to, sell the types of products that you're selling. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah. So this is a very, hearing health is an industry that has experienced rapid technological kind of advances. You go from like hearing aids that weren't even digital 30 years ago to now hearing aids that are Bluetooth and powered by AI and, have in some cases up to like a 40-hour battery life. it's actually, as a side note, hearing aids are one of the test cases for a lot of new technology. So like leading tech companies like Samsung and Apple, they actually look to hearing health products as ways to miniaturize technology, as ways to extend battery life. And
Really?
so technology has advanced dramatically. What hasn't really changed is the way people access that technology. And so, if you wanted to get hearing aids in 1975, you would have gone to the phone book and you would have called up a local audiologist. You would have gone to that audiologist and they would have both treated you and sold you a product. Basically today, for most consumers, the experience is exactly the same. You might go to Yelp and you find that phone number, but you're essentially accessing it the same way. And what's changing in the industry is that Congress this last year, at the end of 2021, passed a new kind of mandate that the FDA come out with standards for over-the-counter hearing aids, so that hearing aids will essentially become a class of technology, consumer technology, versus being a medically prescribed device. And so that law is actually not signed into effect yet. It probably will be in the next month or two. But that's going to change the way that consumers access these products. And, Soundly is operating in the pre-OTC or over-the-counter world right now, but certainly positioned for what it looks like once this law comes into effect. And I think the long term is consumers are going to purchase hearing aids like they do other high education, but other high education tech devices. So you think about something like enhanced home audio or stereo. You think about audio in your car. You're going to do a lot of research up front, but you can access and purchase those products directly. I think hearing health is going to be much the same. It's a very different application, but much the same in terms of the access that consumers have. And Soundly is really, hopefully, will be in a position to become that central resource for those consumers.
Yeah. And speaking of that, right, putting yourself in the best position possible, working for a startup, I understand sorry, I'm tongue tied today. Working for a startup, I totally understand, scalability is key, right, for success. So do you have a strategy? I know you said, once, that legislation's been signed, you guys will be already in a good position there, but what's kind of like beyond that when it comes to scalability?
Yeah. I think when you talk about scale, there's obviously the scale of the product, of the offering, the services that can be offered. I think what I spend most of my time thinking about is the scale of the people that are facing this problem or this challenge. And what's amazing is in the US, and this number holds true mostly globally, about 1 in 10 people have hearing loss. And you mentioned at the top of the podcast that it's something people don't really talk about. It's actually hard to find people to speak about it. But really, like if you're in any crowded room, there are probably 2 or 3 people that are experiencing it and navigating it in different ways. So it's a really common problem. Only 25% of the kind of 1 in 10 people actually treats the problem. So that's why you might not know. It's like a lot of people are not treating it. And so to me, I'm thinking a lot about those 1 in 10 people and how can the access point for hearing healthcare become easier? How can the stigmas break down so that more people are willing to enter into the category? And that's, a pretty significant scale. It's like 37 million people in the US. And I think if Soundly can become the first stop or the front door to this space, there's significant scale that's possible for the business. And then on the other side, in terms of products, I think it's going to be a balance between keeping a focused product set. So right now we have, I think, roughly 60 products that are all hearing aids. We don't offer anything else. Down the line, we definitely want to offer hearing protection, potentially move into other listening devices like speakers and headphones. But those are conversations I think need to happen through the lens of remaining focused on this kind of 1 in 10 Americans who are experiencing hearing loss.
Right. Yeah. And then, so just to kind of shift focus a little bit, as far as, prior to the launch in June, I think it was the beginning of June or end of May that you guys launched, right?
Yeah, end
Prior
of
to
May.
that,
Yeah.
awesome. There were obviously challenges, with any, company getting off the ground, but what do you think, like for you, was like the most significant, or what sticks out to you the most as far as being the most challenging part of launching the site and just really kind of establishing Soundly?
Yeah. I think probably the biggest challenge to getting this project live wasn't really about technology. I think it was probably more about learning a fairly complex system between healthcare providers, laws, brands that are good and bad, some that are not doing, really not doing the consumer service. And there are definitely some of them. None of them are offered on Soundly, but, parsing through all of that information, there were moments through this process where, I kind of was like swimming in information and then trying to emerge with something that feels like a clear thesis for the consumer. I think that probably was like the biggest challenge. Really for a lot of people, that's just, putting together a business plan. But that is I think the main piece that took me the longest. And then I think the other piece, and this is still a challenge every day, and I think it's a challenge for anyone who's doing something in e-commerce, is how can Soundly push itself to not just be kind of a layer on top, but adding real deep value that's integrated and goes deeper for the consumer. And I know a lot of people that are in e-commerce do this in a lot of different ways, but I think for Soundly, that expresses itself in, like tools and technology, essentially, that give the consumer new ways to access the space. You mentioned this earlier, but today we launched an online hearing test. It takes 5 minutes. You can take it from anywhere. You can take it on your phone. You can take it on desktop. You just need a good pair of headphones. And the results are, all of the people that we've had tested. We've had audiologists working on it, sound engineers. All the people that we've had tested get very accurate results to the results that they get in clinic. And it's not intended to replace kind of the clinical experience,
right?
But it gives you a starting point. And so that, I think, is one, it's an example of going beyond just adding sort of a sales layer or a e-commerce layer to the top of a category. It's adding a deeper integrated value for the consumer. And that's something that I feel challenged to do every day and want to continue to push Soundly to do, is to go deeper than just that surface level.
Yeah, absolutely. So you'd say kind of the first part of it is really just, getting clarity in the industry that you're in, really understanding this niche at like a granular level. So you're not just throwing a bunch of products on a site and saying, hey, buy my stuff, right?
Yeah.
Really kind of becoming like the expert in that field, in that space. And then 2, just providing true value, being able to provide almost more of like an experience to your customers versus, again, just here's a site, we've got a cart attached, give us your money, essentially.
Yes, 100%.
And so marrying that, you'd say, was probably the biggest challenge, would be like those 2 pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's especially in a category that, is important to me, at least in a really deep way. It's important to go beyond just the kind of, the scenario you described, which is like, here's a bunch of products, grab the ones you want, throw them in the cart, and trying to, go deeper. Has been a challenge. And I think will continue to be a challenge.
But I think, again, going back to like the term clarity is kind of the one that comes to mind. It's like, as long as you have that, I think that's where, I've seen, worked with a ton of online retailers in the past. And I think that's where I've seen, kind of that men from the boys separation, right? It's those who are just really, committed and dedicated to the products that they're selling, really have a good understanding, versus those who just want to run an online store and, aren't putting, a ton of strategy and effort behind it. So,
I'd agree with that.
And it's funny that you mentioned, so I think we talked about before, it seems like almost anybody that you meet, they have somebody, they like have a cousin or a brother, an aunt's uncle who has some level or layer of hearing loss, right? Whether it's like, oh, I'm 25% deaf in my left ear, or, oh, they're fully, deaf entirely. So it's odd that this is, I think, in the environment that we're in today, it's odd that this is still such a, such a almost like taboo subject, right? It for whatever reason, and it could be because of the lack of, conversations we've had around it, but for whatever reason, it just seems like this is just something that like people talk about and then they kind of deal with, and then that's it, right? There's no, there's no real effort, obviously, unless it's like on your end where it's, becoming more and more of a problem. You can't really understand what people are saying. You're sort of like missing out on important, I know that in high school, I would get in trouble for ignoring a teacher. And then I would have to say like, no, I like truly didn't hear you. So my mom was up in the principal's office a lot, but
good for her.
Yeah. So it's interesting that it's such a, an unspoken topic that so many people are kind of like silently struggling with.
It's so true. And I think in my view, that comes down to, this is something I can talk about for hours, because this is my sort of brand marketer hat, and then my personal experience and watching my own mom and brother and myself kind of struggle with the stigma. And like, my mom, who is actively a advisor on the project and the site, and she looks at everything, reviews it. That's like my gut check. I really have to make sure everything's good before I launch it, because I know she's going to look. But I watching her in her early 40s, as I was, in junior high, watching her, try to get the smallest possible product, and, try to get it at the right skin tone so that less people notice it. And that's perfectly valid. That's a lot of people choose to do that. The hearing aids I wear are very discreet. You can barely see them. But there's this underlying kind of mindset about it that's so different than glasses or, a lot of other things that we do that are assistive in our life. And I think, to me, it kind of comes down to a couple of things. One is like sort of a fundamental piece, which is that hearing products, different than glasses, different than lots of other things, have never been a consumer product. And so they've always been distributed through the medical system, which means that the people who really have kind of the power to market and change the conversation are really only marketing to audiologists, which, by the way, I'm a big fan of audiologists, but the kind of dynamics of the industry are such that the manufacturers sell to the audiologist, and then the audiologist just kind of deals on a retail level. But you don't have anyone operating in the way that, Nike does for shoes, or Warby Parker does for glasses, or even like Gucci does for glasses. It's like there's no one really talking to the consumer at all. And I think that the new legislation that's coming out is going to shift that pretty dramatically, as people are going to have to start talking for real to people that actually wear hearing aids. And I think that will have a big impact on the way this gets talked about. And then I think the other piece is like, we have a fundamental kind of, we need to have a bigger conversation about aging in this country and in the world. And, it's a kind of perennial challenge, but people don't want to be associated with getting old, and your hearing aids make you, they are more common in older people because you do lose your hearing through your life. And so it's sort of a broader conversation around the stigma there, but I think that's something a lot of people do feel like and face, especially when they are getting, maybe into their 50s or 60s and they need some assistance, but they're not ready to, they don't feel like they're fully like a senior yet. They're not ready to kind of think about it that way.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And so when you talk about, having conversations with consumers, especially, how are you connecting to your audience? Like, what would you say is like the biggest tool that you're using?
Yeah. We're just getting started. So I think the ways that this is going to evolve over time get me very excited. There's a lot that we're planning to do. Right now, the main formats for connecting with consumers are, really plainly written, human speak content. So this sort of goes back to the foundation of this project, which is as a blog. And writing things in a way that isn't full of jargon or acronyms, really helping people to understand, okay, a lot of the content, we compare different hearing aid models to cars. Like, you can think of this one as like a Jeep level. You can think of this as like a Mercedes. And it's just taking it into terms that people can start to understand with other reference points in their lives. So really, modernly, humanly written content has been a huge piece for us. And then I think the other piece is building experiences that help guide folks through the process. So the hearing test is an example of that. We also just launched a kind of comparison engine that essentially a person can go through a series of questions, and it will give them a product recommendation at the end. So they can put in things like budget, style they're interested in, if they want it to be in the ear or behind the ear, if they are interested in things like Bluetooth, and then we'll give them one recommendation at the end. So trying to connect with people and help make this process easier in as many ways as we can. Those are big focuses. And then I think in the long term, we have a lot of plans for what I would maybe traditionally think of as like brand marketing or community building. And so things like social campaigns, working on some things with some celebrities and influencers, and just trying to like change it at more of a macro level as well.
Yeah, absolutely. As far as like getting people to the site, like driving them to either the blog or to the comparison tool, what's kind of your biggest strategy there?
I'm right in the middle of figuring it out. So as I'm sure anyone listening or watching this is, but organic traffic's a big one from the blog. Because that's had a couple of years of runway. And I would say to anyone who's thinking about starting a project or maybe has just started one, investing in content, and then not just investing in like random content, but really trying to get under the skin of like, what's the question people are asking? How can I give the best answer online to that question? It's just a great investment, and it's paying off really well for Soundly right now. So that's one piece. And then we're working on we're refining and working on our paid strategy. And, this particular category, it's not, while 1 in 10 Americans have hearing loss, there is a much smaller subset that is in the position to do something about it right at this moment. And so, as with any startup or really any business, it's working really hard on targeting and trying to understand who the right person is and how to kind of reach them at the right time through paid. And mostly we're testing that on Facebook and Instagram right now, but we're looking at some experiments based on our audience on Nextdoor, and a few other platforms as well.
That's awesome. And I love what you mentioned as far as content's concerned, right? I think a lot of people are under the impression that it's just content. It doesn't really matter what you're putting out there as long as you're out there, right? It's sort of like that race to just be like visible and be like, the most like relevant. But yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. You want to make sure that you're obviously providing value in the content that you make available to your consumers. And I was just going through the blog earlier today, prepping for our podcast. And there's a ton of, just like you mentioned, just really speaking, to, the hard of hearing world in a way that it's not this like, big scary conversation as it would be if you did go directly to an audiologist, which I'm sure, right? I'm sure they do their jobs well, but it's a lot more relatable. It's easier to really kind of understand, not only the products, but really understand like where you're coming from and some of the, information that you have in there. So I'm obviously super excited about, keeping an eye on you guys and sort of seeing where you go from here. So, and I know that, I know too, you already, just to kind of wrap this up too, you already gave us a little bit of advice as far as, marketing's concerned, as far as, trying to drive traffic to the site. But in addition to that, is there, really like one, piece of advice you'd give new founders who are looking to launch their own company that's maybe in like a more specific niche, like you are? Is there anything that you can kind of give to them as words of encouragement, or maybe something to like look out for?
Yeah. I think I'm obviously early in this process myself, but I think one thing that I have consistently challenged myself to, and I think is something that I hope can continue to be true for Soundly, is looking to bring something that is new, that in terms of value to the consumer. And I think anyone who's starting a site of any kind, should be able to reasonably look to their left and to their right at what might be their competitors and
Mhm.
and be able to answer the question like, is this bringing more value than already exists, or am I kind of just taking a little piece of the pie that somebody has right now? And that there's you can have a lot of success in sort of just entering a market and just trying to be visible or take up space. And I think the challenge to Soundly and to myself and maybe to others as well, especially in a niche, is, how can something net new be brought to the table? A new design formula, which I think, doing something in an aesthetically new way, organizing it in a new way, building new technology into it, maybe, different types of service that are available, but just doing something that is actually additive versus just kind of takes a piece of an existing category. And I think that has been especially challenging with Soundly because this is such a disparate and kind of, in some ways, developed category. It's like, what is new? What can really be built here that will be a net new experience to the consumer? And I feel proud of where we are now, and I'm excited to even continue to kind of double down on that. The one other piece of advice that I would have is just, as I've talked to other founders, I think not getting too caught up on the sort of name of technology, things like, for example, AI, or things around, there's like conversational commerce, or there are these like buzzword ideas that essentially, if they don't kind of come back, especially in a niche, it's like they don't actually come back to something that kind of makes a bit of sense, then it ends up being a lot of a waste of time. And I've explored lots of technology options for Soundly. And at the end of the day, I find that most of the technology conversations, if they didn't actually start with the consumer, if I'm like, oh, I should look into AI, and I start from that place, I end up mostly wasting my time versus starting with the consumer and being like, the consumer needs better answers in this particular situation. Oh, AI might be the way to answer that. So, I think that's just a general kind of positioning thing that I'm trying to stay close to as we grow.
Awesome. Yeah, like I said, super excited to continue watching you. You guys post awesome content on Instagram. I see you on there all the time. So
Thank you.
I love all the stories you post. Just really cool stuff. So Can you tell everybody, not only on Instagram, but tell everybody about the site, where to find you?
Yeah, so the site's at soundly.com. And if you want to try the hearing test, that is if you just go right to the top, there's a button that says take the hearing test. It takes 5 minutes. I think it's kind of fun. It's quick and easy. And then on social, you can follow us at Hear Soundly on most platforms. So Twitter, Hear Soundly, and Instagram, Hear Soundly. And then I'm Blake Cadwell in most places. But yeah, we'd love to be connected, and soundly.com is a great place to start for all that.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for taking some time today. I know it's earlier over there on the West Coast for you, so I appreciate you giving us your time and a ton of really useful information here.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right, guys, thanks again so much for tuning in to another Modern Merchant podcast episode. If you want to learn more about us, check us out at flexpoint.com. That's Flexpoint without the E.com. We've got our Modern Merchant blog up there. It's full of the latest e-commerce information and news. Also, go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on socials at Flexpoint. We'll see you again next week with another episode.